1. Silence as a philosophical choice. Silence in the Stoic tradition is not a form of retreat, it is a form of strength. Epictetus reminds us we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. This seemingly simple observation points to something deeply philosophical. The discipline of silence is an act of self-mastery. To choose not to speak, especially when provoked, when insulted, or when others expect a reaction, is to assert control over one's impulses. It is to reject emotional slavery and maintain clarity amid chaos. The person who responds with silence is not avoiding conflict. They are refusing to be drawn into a game that others have set, on terms that diminish their inner freedom. Marcus Aurelius offers another powerful insight. You always own the option of having no opinion. In a world saturated with noise, outrage, and demands for immediate response, the ability to withhold judgment, to remain silent, becomes a rare form of power. Marcus understood that the person who speaks constantly is often the one most easily manipulated. A Stoic, by contrast, knows when to withhold his voice, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. He does not need to assert himself in every situation. He does not feel the compulsion to prove his superiority or to dominate a conversation. Silence for him is not weakness. It is freedom from entanglement, a refusal to be a participant in every trivial dispute. When others chase applause or victory in argument, the Stoic retreats into inner stillness. He knows that real understanding does not require performance. Seneca adds a further dimension. Speech is a mirror of the soul. As a man speaks, so is he. For Seneca, excessive talking is often a symptom of intellectual disorder, not a sign of insight. The wise man speaks less, not because he has nothing to say, but because he knows the value of restraint. Words, once released, cannot be recalled. They carry the weight of intention and the risk of misunderstanding. A Stoic does not waste them. He does not speak to impress or to fill silence for its own sake. Instead, he uses speech with the same precision a sculptor uses a chisel, carefully, economically, with purpose. What is left unsaid often carries more meaning than what is spoken. This philosophy of silence runs counter to modern sensibilities. Today, constant expression is celebrated. To be silent is often misread as weakness or lack of confidence. But the Stoic sees it differently. Silence is a filter, a way to separate what matters from what does not. It is a guardrail that prevents the erosion of attention, energy, and intention. It is the boundary that protects one's inner peace from being consumed by the opinions, emotions, and provocations of others. Silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is the presence of clarity. To choose silence when you could lash out, to hold your tongue when your ego demands release, to observe without interrupting. These are not passive behaviors. They are active expressions of wisdom, cultivated through discipline and reflection. In silence, the Stoic reclaims the space to think, to see things as they are, and to remain untouched by what is unnecessary. He does not mistake noise for relevance, nor speaking for significance. Ultimately, silence is not an escape from the world. It is a way of standing firm within it, unshaken, undistracted, and untouched by the turmoil that consumes others. It is a commitment to self-possession, to clarity over chaos, and to presence over performance. In the eyes of the Stoics, silence is not a void. It is a choice, a deeply rational, profoundly philosophical choice, the choice to remain free. 2. Solitude, the highest form of inner freedom. Solitude is often misunderstood. In a world that equates busyness with value and constant interaction with success, the one who withdraws is often pitied or viewed with suspicion. Yet in Stoic philosophy, solitude is not isolation, it is liberation. It is not loneliness, it is alignment with one's true self. For the Stoics, solitude is the highest form of inner freedom, a sacred state where the noise of the world falls away and one finally encounters the truth of their own soul. Seneca, in one of his most powerful letters to Lucilius, writes, "Nothing, to my way of thinking, is a better proof of a well-ordered mind than a man's ability to stop just where he is and pass some time in his own company." For Seneca, solitude is not a condition to be feared, but a test of self-possession. When a person can sit alone, without distraction, without the need for validation, without the itch to escape into noise, that person has arrived at a rare state of clarity. In solitude, the masks fall off. There is no audience to impress, no social game to play. One is left with the raw material of the self, one's fears, one's longings, one's values. Most people fear this encounter. They fill their days with conversation, entertainment, or obligation, anything to avoid facing the silence within. But the Stoic welcomes it, because in that silence, the soul speaks. Marcus Aurelius understood this inner refuge well. As Emperor of Rome, he was constantly surrounded by people, duties, and chaos. Yet, in his meditations, he wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." This is a radical idea, that even in the heart of empire, surrounded by noise and pressure, the Stoic can retreat inward and find solitude. True solitude is not about physical isolation. It is a spiritual posture, a refusal to be enslaved by the judgments, expectations, or distractions of others. It is the realization that you carry within you a space no one else can touch. In this space, you do not need approval. You do not fear rejection. You simply are, present, undisturbed, and self-contained. Marcus's version of solitude is not escapism, it is sovereignty. It is the refusal to allow the external world to define your inner state. Epictetus goes further. He frames solitude as the ultimate test of integrity. If you are ever tempted to look for outside approval, realize that you have compromised your own integrity. In other words, the person who cannot bear to be alone is a person still in chains of dependency, comparison, insecurity. The craving for applause, agreement, or validation reveals a mind that has not yet learned to stand on its own. For Epictetus, true freedom begins when you no longer look outward for who you are. When you can sit in a room, stripped of all titles, roles, or opinions, and still feel whole, that is the mark of a Stoic. Solitude, then, is not a withdrawal from life. It is the most direct way to return to what is essential. But this kind of solitude cannot be forced. It is cultivated through practice. One must learn to be still, to listen inwardly, to question one's attachments. It means examining one's desires. Do I want this because I truly value it, or because I want someone to see me wanting it? It means watching one's thoughts. Am I chasing success for its own sake, or for applause? The answers to these questions emerge most clearly in solitude. There, the noise of the world fades, and what remains is the truth. To the modern mind, constantly plugged in and bombarded with stimuli, solitude can feel unnatural. But the Stoics would argue that what feels unnatural is not solitude. It is our addiction to distraction. Solitude is the baseline, the original state. It is where we came from and where we return to, whether we acknowledge it or not. The wise do not wait for external silence. They cultivate internal silence. 3. Silence for observation, understanding, and self-control. Silence is not the absence of response. It is the mastery of response. In Stoic philosophy, silence is not weakness or hesitation, but a deliberate space one creates to observe, understand, and take command of oneself. In a world where noise dominates and speed is mistaken for wisdom, silence becomes a revolutionary act. It is how a Stoic thinks before speaking, sees clearly before acting, and chooses inner clarity over outer chaos. Epictetus, the great teacher of mental discipline, emphasized the importance of withholding immediate reactions. To him, our first impressions, or fantasia, are often distorted. When something happens, we don't just perceive it, we interpret it emotionally and instantly. But a wise person delays this process. Epictetus urged his students to pause and examine the impression before granting it truth, and silence is the most effective tool for that pause. By not responding out loud, we create space to question, why do I want to speak? What is the motive behind this urge? In choosing not to speak, we can suddenly see more, not only the nature of the event, but also the internal triggers it activates. Silence here is not withdrawal, but insight. It allows us to detect whether we are about to react out of pride, fear, anger, or insecurity. When used well, silence becomes a filter, like separating noise from necessity, reaction from reason. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, saw the power of silent observation as the foundation of rational life. In his meditations, he wrote, "To accept without arrogance, to let go without attachment." These are not just attitudes, they are actions of deep restraint, the kind that silence enables. To accept without arrogance means to observe reality without forcing your ego onto it. To let go without attachment means to release outcomes without dramatizing them. And both require silence. Silence towards others, but more importantly, silence towards the mental commentary that wants to judge every experience instantly. Marcus believed that maturity means resisting the impulse to label, to complain, to impose. The Stoic path demands that we observe clearly before we assign meaning. And this clarity can only arise when we are quiet enough to see what is actually in front of us and what is going on inside of us. The silent person is not passive. They are engaged with a higher form of attention. They are listening to the world, not talking over it. Seneca, with his philosophical elegance, considered restraint in speech to be one of the clearest signs of wisdom. He famously wrote, "A man is unhappy, though he reign the world, if he does not feel himself supremely happy in his solitude." Here, solitude and silence intertwine. The person who can be content in silence is a person who needs no performance, no audience, no noise to affirm their value. For Seneca, silence is not empty. It is a message, a nonverbal stance of strength, dignity, and inner confidence. In fact, silence often speaks more than words do. A man who holds his tongue in the face of provocation says something louder than an angry retort ever could. In moments where others explode, the one who remains silent does not go unnoticed. His presence has weight. The power lies not in the volume of his voice, but in the gravity of his restraint. In Stoicism, silence is never for show. It is not used to manipulate, guilt, or punish others. It is used to govern the self. It allows us to see our thoughts before they become speech, to understand our emotions before they become actions. In that pause, we reclaim authority over our inner world. We stop being puppets pulled by every impulse and become authors of our responses. The goal is not to never speak, but to speak when it is right and to speak only what is true, useful, and wise. In modern times, where attention is scarce and shouting is rewarded, silence is often misunderstood as indifference or weakness. But the Stoic knows otherwise. Silence is the tool of the strong, not the timid. It is the shield of the thoughtful, not the disengaged. It is what allows a person to stand firm in clarity even while others drown in noise. To practice silence is to train the self not to be owned by reaction. It is to move beyond the surface. Solitude is not abandonment, but a deliberate choice to stand alone. Solitude in Stoic philosophy is not a sign of weakness, abandonment, or isolation. It is a deliberate and courageous act of standing apart in order to return to oneself. The Stoics never feared being alone. They feared being disconnected from reason, virtue, and the inner clarity that can only emerge in silence. To choose solitude is not to run away from the world, but to rise above it. It is the declaration that the most meaningful life is not found in the approval of others, but in the mastery of self. Epictetus, a former slave who became a teacher of philosophical freedom, taught that true liberty cannot be granted by society. It must be claimed by the individual. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life, he said. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And among the very first things we must disregard is the opinion of others. If your sense of worth rises and falls based on how others see you, you are never free. You are a hostage to their moods, their standards, their preferences. Epictetus challenges us to realize that no external validation, no applause, no admiration, no belonging to the crowd can compensate for a soul that is estranged from itself. The Stoic path is, by nature, a solitary one. You must think for yourself. You must govern your reactions. You must take full responsibility for your judgments, values, and choices. No one can carry that burden for you. In solitude, we stop outsourcing our worth and begin reclaiming our sovereignty. Seneca takes this further by defining true power as self-sufficiency. He is most powerful who has power over himself. This is not the power to dominate others, but the strength to stand alone, peacefully, contentedly, and undisturbed. The Stoic does not pursue completeness outside himself because he understands that the external world is unstable, unreliable, and indifferent to our hopes. To base your fulfillment on the external is to build a palace on shifting sand. Instead, the Stoic cultivates his inner life as the only domain over which he can exercise complete authority. In solitude, he is not empty, he is full. He is not lonely, he is self-contained. This self-sufficiency is not arrogance, it is maturity. It is the capacity to enjoy your own company, to draw from the deep well of your own values and reflections, and to be undisturbed by whether others are watching or not. The man who needs the crowd has not yet found himself. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, viewed solitude not as escape, but as necessary restoration. Amid the pressures of empire, war, and constant public scrutiny, he often retreated, not physically, but inwardly, to the quiet fortress of his soul. "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul," he wrote. The metaphor he offers is striking. Solitude is like a well, a source of renewal after the exhaustion of public life. The marketplace of opinion, the endless noise of human drama, all of it drains the soul. One must return again and again to the sacred space within where clarity is possible. And that space cannot be accessed in the chaos of the crowd. It must be sought in stillness, in silence, in voluntary withdrawal. Solitude for Marcus was not a sign of despair, but of dignity. Not a weakness, but a wisdom. It is where a person becomes whole again after being fragmented by the demands of the world. Thus, in Stoic thought, solitude is not an unfortunate condition to be cured. It is a virtue to be cultivated. It demands that you be enough for yourself, that you do not need noise to feel important or people to feel real. It is the realm in which you discover what you truly think, what you actually value, and who you are without the masks that society forces upon you. The Stoic who can endure solitude with grace has passed one of the most difficult spiritual tests. He has become his own companion, and that is the beginning of true freedom. Solitude is not about cutting ties with the world. It is about anchoring yourself so deeply within that the world can no longer pull you apart. It is the opposite of being lost. It is the rediscovery of self. To walk alone is not to be abandoned. It is to choose the harder, nobler path where the only voice you answer to. 5. Silence is the final rebellion against a chaotic world. In a world where everyone seems to be shouting, silence has become a revolutionary act. It is not the silence of fear or submission, but of strength, clarity, and sovereign restraint. To be silent in a time of noise is to reclaim your mind from the hysteria of the crowd. For the Stoics, silence is not the absence of thought. It is the discipline of thought. It is a conscious refusal to be swept away by the chaos, a protest not with words, but with composure. The modern world rewards quick reactions, loud opinions, and endless commentary. Everyone has something to say, but few take the time to understand. Information is plentiful, but wisdom is rare. As Marcus Aurelius once observed, the opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. To speak without knowledge, to react without reflection, is to contribute to the very noise that is eroding our ability to think clearly. The Stoic chooses silence not because he has nothing to say, but because he knows when to say nothing. In a climate of intellectual clutter and emotional overreaction, silence is the voice of discernment. It is a refusal to add to the confusion, to let the mob define the terms of your engagement. Silence becomes, paradoxically, the highest form of participation. It is how the wise protest the absurd. Seneca understood that in times of disorder, the person who remains calm becomes the most dangerous presence. He wrote often about the inner fortress of the mind, a place that chaos cannot reach unless invited in. To not react, to not argue, to not raise your voice when provoked, this is not weakness. It is formidable discipline. The Stoic is dangerous not because he is loud, but because he cannot be provoked easily. He has trained himself to respond only to what matters. He wastes no energy trying to convince the unconvincible or compete in games that serve no purpose. His calmness is his strength. His refusal to react is his rebellion. He knows that the louder others become, the more powerful silence is. It is the space where true confidence lives, a confidence that does not require validation or applause. To stay silent is to say, I do not need to win this argument. I do not need to be heard by those who cannot listen. I only need to remain in control of myself. Epictetus, too, saw silence not as evasion, but as a profound declaration. To be silent in the face of insult, to refrain from retaliation when attacked, is not to back down, it is to rise above. No one is free who is not master of himself. Freedom in this view is not merely the absence of chains, but the presence of self-command. And there is no greater evidence of self-command than the ability to withhold a reaction, to not answer every provocation, to not participate in every conflict, to not explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. Silence, then, becomes a weapon, not of violence, but of wisdom. It is how the Stoic maintains his integrity in a world that demands his participation in madness. When others clamor for attention, the Stoic withdraws into reflection. When others rush to speak, he waits to understand. When others erupt in outrage, he remains anchored in reason. In this silence, there is immense power. Ultimately, the Stoic silence is not a void, it is a stance. It is the final rebellion against a world that wants to drag you into its noise, its anxieties, its drama. It is saying no, not with anger, but with stillness. It is stepping out of the current that sweeps so many away. It is, above all, the choice to remain fully human in a time of dehumanizing speed, to speak when it is useful and to be silent when it is wise. This is the art of resistance practiced not in the streets, but in the soul. And so in a world where chaos has become the norm and noise has become currency, the Stoic stands apart. He listens more than he speaks. He chooses reflection over reaction. He embraces silence not as an escape, but as a triumph, because in that silence, he is free. Free from the need to impress, to argue, to prove. He is not a prisoner of opinion. He is not a puppet of emotion. He is a master of himself, and in that mastery, he is unshakable. 6. The art of being alone, where the Stoic truly lives. There is a common misconception that life is only meaningful when shared, that to live fully, one must have companionship, conversation, validation. But for the Stoics, being alone is not a deficiency. It is an art, a philosophical journey where the mind returns to itself and reason finds its deepest form of freedom. A great mind becomes a great companion to itself, wrote Seneca. A strong mind is never afraid of solitude, for it has learned how to keep company with itself, needing neither applause nor external voices to affirm its worth. The Stoics understood that the most important journey in life is not the journey through the world, but the journey inward. And on that path, no one can walk with you. You may have lovers, friends, family, but when facing loss, confronting difficult decisions, or standing before death, it is you and your mind alone. Stoicism does not teach isolation, but it emphasizes this: if you cannot live with yourself, you have never truly lived. Because only in solitude do you discover who you are, what you think, and whether you are living by reason or by impulse. Marcus Aurelius, both emperor and philosopher, once wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. Nowhere is more sacred than within." In solitude, Marcus did not feel abandoned. He found sacred space. Space to listen to the voice of Logos, the rational principle of the universe to which all Stoics aspire. He did not seek guidance from the crowd, but from silence. Because only when the outer world is quiet can one hear the subtle rhythms of the inner world. Silence and solitude are not voids, they are spaces where reason breathes, where reflection arises, and where the soul finds its natural order again. To the Stoics, Logos is not a distant abstraction. It is a living principle, the rational order embedded in all things, including yourself. To live in harmony with it, you must escape the noise of society and return to the rhythm of nature. You need quiet. You need to withdraw. You must learn how to be alone. Because the voice of Logos is soft. It cannot be heard over the roar of social media, television, gossip, or trivial conversations. As one deepens in Stoicism, one retreats into the inner world, not out of fear, but as a form of refinement. It is not withdrawal, but clarity. It is the refusal to live by the expectations of the crowd. It is the end of the pursuit of validation. The Stoic does not strive to be special in the eyes of others. They strive to be in accordance with reason, with nature, and with human dignity. And to do so, they need space. They need stillness. They need solitude. Epictetus said it plainly: freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And the first thing beyond your control? The approval of others. When you live for others' opinions, you surrender your freedom. When you need the crowd to feel complete, you have given away the reins of your soul. This is why the Stoic chooses to stand alone. They train themselves in self-sufficiency, not to reject love, but to love without possession, without neediness, without fear. At the end of the path, you will see, the Stoic does not fear solitude, because that is where they truly belong. When the world pushes, the Stoic pulls back, not to escape, but to stand firm. Not in fear, but in truth. For truth does not need to shout. Value does not need to be proven. And reason, the guiding light, can only shine when you are quiet enough to see it. The art of being alone is not the art of locking yourself away from the world. It is the art of living amidst the world without letting the world consume you. It is the ability to find peace not when everything is calm, but even when everything is in chaos. It is the strength to hold to reason when others lose their way. It is the rare capacity to befriend your own soul with no script, no audience, no applause. And when you can live like that, you are not just a Stoic. You are a free human being.